with David Dimbleby.
After months of campaigning, thousands of speeches, millions of words, the United States today elects its 43rd president. 150 million Americans can choose between Republican George W. Bush and Democrat Vice President Al Gore. The closest race in 40 years as they battle state by state for victory. And good evening from Washington. Well, we know it's going to be a very, very tight thing. We don't know when we're going to know who's the new president, but it's going to be a really exciting race. There's not been one like this since Jack Kennedy won back in 1960, 40 years ago. We've had the polls in just 2 states where the polls have closed. And the American system is that when the polls close, people start to say what they think the result is and sometimes say what it is, because they don't have to count votes. They simply use electronic voting and exit polls and all the rest. So Kentucky and Indiana we've had, and they've both gone for Bush. That's 2 states for Bush, 20 votes in the Electoral College. The important thing, of course, to get 270 votes in the Electoral College from all these states all over America. Now, in half an hour from now, at 7 o'clock, another 6 states close in that hour between 7 and 8, and that includes Florida, which is a vital state for the winner to gain. It brings 25 votes towards the 270 needed. And both candidates have been campaigning there right up to last night when Al Gore was at a great party there in Miami. So this excitement's been going on. It's been building up. The people, both candidates and all their supporters, have been working flat out right up to the end. They're now at their headquarters waiting to see the first indications coming through. And the indications are that almost everything is too close to call. Peter Snow is going to be analysing the results for us as they come in, and will give us the significance of these 2 which we've had and talk about how he's going to present the others. Peter.
OK, David, we'll meet our map. First of all, here it is, and it'll unfold way across there from east to west with those 2 blue results there. Blue for Republican, blue for George Bush. There's Indiana. 12 of those electoral votes that David was talking about, and 8 electoral votes in Kentucky. Kentucky is a change from last time. Clinton won that in 1996, so it's at least an edging in the direction of Bush, but they are pretty strong Republican states. Let's just look at what the polls are telling us. The answer is they're not really telling us very much. They're telling us that these are the states, these light blue ones, that are likely to go with George Bush, 24 of them altogether, and that 13 states are likely to go with Al Gore. What about the rest of them, though? They're not telling us. They say they're too close to call, so we're not getting much guidance about what the result's going to be. It's going to be very tight indeed. The key thing, as David was saying, though, is that it doesn't matter how many states you win. What matters is the kind of states you win, the amount of population those states have. Notice that Al Gore, with only 13, has actually the best-looking states: New York, Illinois, and California. Only Texas looking solid for Bush. So it's the weight of the states that matters. So the battle then will be decided in these 2 close-to-call states. It's been like this right through the campaign. This is what's going to happen. It's going to be very, very tight in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Missouri, down here in Tennessee, Al Gore's own state, and finally, as David also was saying, that vital state of Florida, there are 25 of those key electoral votes. That's where the battle will be fought, David.
Thanks so much, Peter. We'll be going back to Peter later on. Well, now, this broadcast tonight is on BBC One, it's on News 24, it's on BBC World, and wherever you are in the world, you can also watch it on the internet. You can join in on our online debates, you can get all the latest news. We are to be found at www.bbc.co.uk/vote2000USA. Now, we're going to be reporting, of course, from right across the United States tonight, from some of the exciting places, and we're also going to be not just with the candidates, but we'll be hearing from the American voters as well. And let's start straight away by crossing this vast continent and going to the West Coast and joining Sian Williams in Los Angeles.
Here on Venice Beach, we'll be talking to the interest groups about the issues that'll determine who gets this election's biggest prize, California's 54 Electoral College votes. Now, the Democrats might have thought they had this sewn up, but the Republicans have been here spending millions, and it's prompted last-minute visits from Al Gore and Bill Clinton. And what about the effect of Ralph Nader's Green Party, not just here, but also in Washington and Oregon? Well, the 3 are among the last to declare. It could all be decided here on the West Coast.
They call this the crossroads of the world. It is, of course, Times Square in New York. And from here, I'll be gauging the reaction as the results come in. But we'll be doing more. We'll be asking, what do Americans expect from their new president when it comes to the economy? And we'll be asking, how are the markets likely to react when trading begins on Wednesday?
I'm here at Sylvia's, one of the most famous restaurants in Harlem. And throughout the evening, I'll be talking to people, both here and at other locations in New York City, about how they voted today. Now, New York is almost certainly going to go for Al Gore, but I get the impression, having spoken to lots of people coming out of polling stations earlier in the day, that they've gone for Gore, but without much enthusiasm.
Well, our reporters are also at the camps of the two presidential candidates and with President Clinton and Hillary, the First Lady, who of course is running for a US Senate seat in New York. Philippa Thomas is with George W. Bush in Austin, Texas. John Simpson is in Nashville, Tennessee, where Vice President Gore is no doubt biting his nails at this moment. And Gavin Hewitt is with President and with Hillary Clinton in New York. Let's start with you, Philippa Thomas. What drift do you get from the camp at the moment?
Well, David, it's extraordinary that we've got to this point, this late in the day, in fact, in the campaign, and we still don't know which side is going to get it. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Bush camp has the equivalent of Peter Snow's map up on the wall, their own computer projections. We are hearing that there is some worry that Al Gore could get Florida, that crucial state that gives 25 electoral votes. That's obviously very, very close. There is also some worry that Al Gore could take Pennsylvania, another swing state. But the Bush camp is saying we're still very confident, even without those states. Basically, George W. Bush has a broader area of support across the country. He could still construct that winning scenario. So still they're saying, we believe Austin is the home of the next president of the United States.
Do you think they got a bit cocky, Philippa? This business about you're looking, he said yesterday, you're looking at the next president. A feeling of being a bit too laid back at the last minute?
Don't you think, David, that phrase could come back and ring in George W. Bush's ears, a terrible memory if he loses this election? I think they are worried that they looked a bit too confident, especially at that late night rally. We were also hearing from Bush's chief political strategist, Karl Rove, that Bush was going to win by 6 percentage points and get more than 300 electoral votes. Of course, that could happen, but I think they're worrying that they may have been just a bit overconfident and that there's a danger the voters would have seen that as being a bit too smug.
Thanks, Philippa. John, do you think that the Gore camp is encouraged by at least how close it's going to be compared with what the polls were saying just a couple of days ago?
I suppose that must be true, but they are pretty nervous, I have to say. I was talking to one of the most senior officials around here, and he was just telling me that they're maybe 1% ahead in one particular state, maybe 2% ahead in another. Actually, the 1% was in Florida, they thought. But since then, the word that's going around here is that far from getting 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College, in fact, it could just be a tie of 269 to Bush, 269 to Gore. What happens then is a constitutional nightmare. There's all sorts of complexities what would happen if that goes through. So we really don't know, and the Gore camp, I think, are just keeping very quiet, and they're a bit nervous.
But John, they've been pulling out the stops at the last minute. I mean, we heard reports that Jesse Jackson had been sent off to Michigan, that Ted Kennedy had been sent off up to Maine or somewhere to try and get the votes out, and that they were confident that they were getting people at least to go to the polls, and this was going to improve their chances. Is that all true?
Yes, it is. One of the straws, as it were, that they're grasping at is the hope, at any rate, that blue-collar workers will come home after work and will go out to vote. And so, therefore, the evening this time is really important. It's really valuable for them, and they're putting everything they can into getting those people to come out and telling them. The fact, of course, that everybody's starting to say how close it is a kind of encouragement to come out and vote. And as to be said, I mean, this is not a country with high turnouts, but the last time, 1996, it was only 49%. It looks as though it's going to be a lot higher than that this time.
And the blue-collar workers, of course, in some of these places like Michigan, for instance, where it's important to get that vote out, this time some of them have negotiated in their contracts, don't they, that they get the day off on election day so they can go to the polls. So it should be up a bit.
a little bit, but they're not very confident here about Michigan, I must say. So if that's been negotiated in their contract, it was perhaps a little bit of a waste of bargaining power. It's really, I think we're going to be in for a difficult night, and I'm not expecting to see any victory celebrations here for a bit.
Okay, John, well, you'll be no doubt sleuthing around in your usual way, and we'll come back to you as soon as you have a bit more. Thanks very much indeed. We go to New York now and join Gavin Hewitt, who's been with President Clinton, and more important tonight, with Hillary Clinton, who's running for the Senate. Gavin.
I'm in the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, and any minute now, Hillary Clinton, the President, and Chelsea will arrive here, and they'll go to a suite above where I'm sitting at the moment, and from there they'll begin to follow the results during the evening. I have to say, having spoken to Hillary Clinton's people, that they are very confident. They do feel at the moment that they are ahead, but this has been a very close race, and they don't really expect here a result that they can depend on for several hours. One interesting thing, during the afternoon, President Clinton has been on the phone, and he's been phoning Labour leaders, and particularly he's been phoning the African American community, urging them to get out the vote, not just on behalf of his wife, although that's very important to him, but on behalf of Al Gore. And he clearly believes that's one of the key factors in this election tonight.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Gavin. We'll be back with you. We'll be back with you through the night. It's obviously going to be quite a long night, and maybe Hillary's result will come through sooner than some of the others, certainly perhaps sooner than the presidential. If it's a tie, as John Simpson said, of course, the whole thing becomes very complicated because they have to have a vote of the new Congress, and they get one vote for each state. It's a really weird thing that hasn't been done since 1888. Anyway, I have two distinguished political commentators with me here. First of all, I have Caspar Weinberger, who it's unconstitutional to call Sir Caspar Weinberger, though he's got a British knighthood, an honorary knighthood. He was Defense Secretary under Reagan, of course, is a Republican. And Doug Sosnick, who was a White House aide to Clinton right up until this year, 6 years. So, and I hope in a moment we're going to be joined by George Mitchell from New York, but I don't know about that. When we get in touch with him, we'll have him. This election, sirs, just tell us about it. Why, after a year, millions of pounds spent, billions of words spoken, can the American electorate apparently not make up their minds between two fairly different characters? Caspar Weinberger.
Well, I've never been able to predict with any confidence what the American electorate is going to do, and I don't think anybody really ought to try. Different factors enter into it. And I think that there's a recognition that economic times are pretty good, but there's also, I think...
Or pretty bad, according to many commentators.
Well, it's going to be probably pretty bad, but it is pretty good at the moment. But the other thing is that I think counterbalancing that is a strong desire on the part of many people to, in a sense, clean up the White House and get a slightly more... moral fiber to the whole thing than there's been the last 8 years.
So you're saying that Al Gore is of low moral fiber simply because he was the vice president?
Well, I don't think
for a president who as you might say, besmirched the reputation of the White House?
Well, he was not only a vice president for him, but he defended him right up to the end in the most vigorous terms, keep referring to him as the greatest president we've ever had, and all those kinds of things. So I think that is not helping him in any way.
Okay, Doug Sosnick, do you agree with this view that that's Al Gore's problem, that he's been so close to Bill Clinton?
Well, I would actually probably give you a slightly less partisan answer to your question. I think that the American public has doubts about both George Bush and Al Gore and hasn't been able up until Election Day to resolve those doubts, and many people have stayed undecided because I think in the case of George Bush there's some doubts as to whether or not he's up to the job, and I think in the case of Al Gore there's some doubts as to whether people feel comfortable with him and whether or not they want to have him in their living room for the next 4 years.
What do you think about the technique of keeping Bill Clinton, to whom you were very close? I mean, he cried on your shoulder throughout these crises, didn't he, effectively? Of keeping him way out of sight right through, so that in the end he was just really fighting for Hillary in New York?
Well, I think the impact of Bill Clinton has been exaggerated, both in terms of how it would hurt Al Gore or how he could have helped Al Gore if he were to campaign. The reality is, for most people who dislike Bill Clinton, I think they never were probably going to vote for Al Gore. And I think for other people who really like Bill Clinton, I think George Bush was never going to get their vote. And so it's those people who don't have that strong feeling about Bill Clinton in the middle who I think are going to look at the choice between the two candidates and make their choice about who they're going to vote for the next president based on that choice rather than on Bill Clinton.
Okay. Well, we're joined by George Mitchell, Senator Mitchell, who of course is famous in Britain for chairing the Northern Ireland peace talks, the Good Friday Agreement, and now has just been made chair of the investigation into the violence between Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East. That was announced today. Senator Mitchell, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know whether you've been able to hear what Doug Sosnick and Caspar Weinberger were saying, but could you throw some light on why it's been so difficult for the Americans to make up their minds? I mean, is it because they don't really enthuse about either candidate?
Well, I think, David, that two basic underlying forces are colliding. One is the desire for change, and the other is the desire to continue the unprecedented prosperity of the past 8 years. And as a result, people have had a difficult time making up their minds. The other collision centers around the individuals. Gore is clearly more experienced and knowledgeable. Bush is clearly more likable in the terms of the reactions of the American people to them. And so those two forces are colliding, and the result is a very close race all the way around.
But when you say that American people want change, you say the economy is going well, but they want change. What kind of change? Why would they want change?
I think it's inherent in any democratic society, David. I was in the United Kingdom in 1997. There had been 16 years of Tory governments. The people really wanted change, and they made a change. I think no matter how good you are as a government in a democratic society, people don't want the same thing over a very long period of time, and I think it's a natural desire for change. And I think that does exist in the country today, but it does collide with the desire to keep this unprecedented prosperity going.
How much, it's difficult to gauge from Britain, but how much did the Monica Lewinsky affair damage the Democrats in this election?
Oh, I don't think it's had very much effect at all. In the first place, most people recognize that it was a personal failure on the part of the president. It had nothing to do with policy or with party. Secondly, Americans are intelligent enough to realize that personal failures exist among individuals in both parties. Neither party has a monopoly on morality or goodness, and one need only look at recent history to document that. So I think it's had less effect than has been reported, and I think overanalyzed in the media.
Caspar Weinberger, do you agree with that, Senator Mitchell was saying?
I don't really. I think there's a very large number of American people who are pretty outraged to see the White House, which they regard as a basically almost a major icon of the country, treated the way Mr. Clinton treated the White House. I think it made a major impact, and I think the fact that when you add an impeachment trial to that, in which 50 senators voted to impeach the president, you have something that has had quite a deep effect and quite a lasting effect.
How competent do you think George W. Bush would be for the presidency if he gets it? I mean, he's compared with, is he?
He's perfectly competent. He's had a great deal of experience. He's run a very large state. He's run it very well. He has some extremely good people working with him, particularly in the foreign policy and in the security area. I have no slight doubt whatever that he.
Well, even if he muddles up one country for another and one leader for another,
well,
and shrugs his shoulders and laughs about it.
Presidency is a lot more than taking an oral examination for a grade school commentator. So that I think that it's not a. I don't think those are the ways you judge it. I think you judge it by his record, which has been very fine in Texas. He's had a lot of executive experience.
Do you want on a point of policy to see the U.S. pull out of Kosovo as one of his policies,
well, I don't know
generally to give more power to
whether we should ever have gone into
right?
Kosovo the way we did. I favored going in and doing some attacking of Milosevic, but I didn't favor going in there without any purpose or without any end in view. And we left Milosevic in power, complete with his army intact, so that was not a very useful way to go in.
But George Bush is interpreted as wanting America to play a less prominent role in international affairs, and that worries not everybody. Some people would like that, but some people are worried about it.
I don't think it's a less prominent role. I think it's a great exercising greater selection. There's a great deal the military can do, and our military is called on to do even more than that because they are so good. But you have to have some military task and a military objective, and you don't have that in either Bosnia or in Yugoslavia.
Doug Sosnick, do you think there's a desirable change in foreign policy if Bush wins?
I think there are probably...
Or does it not matter? It doesn't matter
There's
too much
some
to American
differences,
people,
but I don't
perhaps.
think that's really going to be a cutting-edge decision maker in terms of how people vote. Although Mr. Weinberger said that George Bush would be perfectly competent to be president, I think that the bar should be set higher than that. And I think most people think that Al Gore is very competent and knows the job after 8 years as vice president, much more qualified than Governor Bush.
Do we have George Mitchell with us still in New York? I'm not sure. Senator Mitchell, just one thing on the role that you've played in Northern Ireland and in Middle East. If it's a Republican victory, do you think things will change? Would George Bush's approach to Northern Ireland and indeed to the Middle East differ?
I have no knowledge of Governor Bush's views with respect to Northern Ireland. I frankly have never heard him discuss the subject. I can say that I have discussed it with Vice President Gore, and I think there would continue to be strong American support and encouragement for the peace process there, and I hope the same is true if Governor Bush is elected.
Okay, well, we'll come back with some of that later on. Let's go back now to the election, and at 7 o'clock we're going to get results from South Carolina and Vermont. We're going to get those results as the polls closed in those two places. We're going to be judging, of course, the Electoral College, the key to the whole thing being the Electoral College, winning candidate, having to win votes there state by state until they have a majority. It's very important for tonight to grasp this 270 majority in the Electoral College. So let's go to Peter Snow now and just have a full explanation of what it all means. Peter.
Well, there's the glittering prize. There's the major icon that Caspar Weinberger was referring to. 270 of those electoral votes. That's the winning line there, but look what a long course both these candidates have got to pursue before they get there. Well, they're off, of course, because Kentucky and Indiana have gone to George Bush. He's got a long way to go yet. 270 the target, 20 so far, 250 short. That'll be clocking up as the night goes on right the way through. Now, what are these electoral votes all about? It's simply explained like this. Take California, the most populous state in the Union, 31 million people. Compare that with the Wyoming, the smallest in population in the Union, 500,000. What they do is they say, right, we'll award electoral votes, 54, for example, a big lot to California, only 3 to Wyoming, and lots of other ones in between for states of various sizes in between. A total of 538 electoral votes. Now, what happens is that the winner of the popular vote in each state, Bush getting one more vote, all those millions of votes in California than the other guy, Al Gore, he takes all those electoral votes in California. 270 is halfway to 538. That's basically how it works. Now, the amazing thing about American elections is that no matter how close you are in share, look at Kennedy and Nixon back in 1960, another very, very close election. It could be as tight as that this time. Kennedy just a tiny bit ahead of Nixon, only 0.2%, but look at the difference in electoral votes. That's because Kennedy stacked up the electoral votes in the states that counted. That could just happen with Gore tonight in New York, in California, perhaps even in Pennsylvania and Michigan, those key states up there in the Midwest. Now, down here you have 219 only for Nixon. Look how he lost that. You could even get an incredible upset like this. Look here as Benjamin Harrison back in 1888, 47.8% of the vote. Grover Cleveland, the Democrat, 48.6, more than the other guy. But look what happened in the electoral votes. 233 for the loser in the popular vote over the whole of America, 168 only for the person with the biggest popular vote. So you can actually win an American election with a lower popular vote, but more electoral votes, because it depends where those votes are. Now let's have a look at the really key states in the Union. The Big Seven, we call them. These are the ones with more than 20 electoral votes. California, 54. New York, 33. Texas, 32. Going down in descending order. Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio. Those are the Big Seven. Those are 210 electoral votes altogether. If you win all those, you're well on the way to victory. What's traditionally happened is that anybody wanting to be president's got to win 4 of these Big Seven. Well, now here's what happened last time. When Bill Clinton cleaned up Bob Dole, he won 6 of the Big Seven. Only Texas stayed with Bob Dole. So this time, what George Bush and Al Gore have got to do, George Bush, in this case, has got to win 4 of those 7. He's got to win Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida. That's why Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio are absolutely crucial. We'll be talking about them a great deal tonight. That's why they campaigned so heavily in those states. Now, this is a general election in America. It's all about Congress as well, and even local government too. In Congress, 2 houses of Congress. Let's just take the lid off the Senate first. 100 members of the Senate, 34 of them, about a third of senators being elected this time. Here they are. This is the position in 1998, the last time they were elected 2 years ago. 54 Republicans to 46 Democrats. A majority of 8 for the Republicans then in the Senate. In the House over the other side there, let's just take the lid off and see what's going on in there. Here we are. Here are 435 representatives. All of them elected every 2 years. They have a hell of a time. And here we have the Republicans on 222 and the Democrats on 209. So a very tight House and a very tight Senate at the moment, all to play for in Congress, just like the presidential election, David.
Good, Peter, thanks very much. Well, now, sitting beside me here, Professor Anthony King, who's the Professor of Government at Essex University, a long-time student of and writer about the American political scene. And we're joined by Carlin Bowman, who's political analyst at the American Enterprise Institute, and equally an expert in all these matters. So, Carlin, first of all, throw some light on what is actually happening today out there, and people are still going to the polls. Why is it turning out like this?
Well, everything is at stake, and I think, as the earlier guest said, that neither candidate made the sale, so we have a very close race. We also have a very closely divided House of Representatives. The Senate is divided 54-46, and so that could be a very close race. Close races this evening, and so the whole, it's a nail biter.
And the interesting thing is the whole structure of American government will hang on, as Peter was saying, Congress on the one hand and the presidency on another.
Absolutely.
So until all the cards have fallen onto the table, you don't know what kind of government you're going to get.
We do not.
Why do you think it's been so close? We heard what...
I think that we've had such a good economy, and I think, frankly, most Americans believe both of these men would make a good president.
Do you agree with that? That they think they make a good president?
I think what's astonishing about this race is that Gore isn't several points ahead. America has never been more prosperous. America is at peace. Both parties are tolerably moderate at the moment, and there still is a Democratic advantage out there amongst the population at large. On the face of it, Mr. Gore ought to be 4, 5, 6 points ahead. The really interesting question about this election, even if he wins it, is why he's won it so narrowly.
Well, I mean, many people would say it was his rather stiff character that didn't come over in an appealing way on television.
I think there may be a personality element, but I suspect there's a little bit more to that. One element in all this has been the manifest reluctance of Al Gore to identify himself with the Clinton administration, even to the extent of pointing out that for 8 years the Clinton administration has delivered peace and prosperity. He's been reluctant to get stuck in there and say, look, if you want more of what you've had over the last 8 years, you should vote for me. Also, he's made a lot of rather divisive, if I can use this British language, kind of old Democrat noises. He's actually a centrist in terms of the Democratic Party, but he's come over more and more during the campaign as an old-fashioned labor-leaning Democrat, and I suspect that's put off an awful lot of middle-of-the-road voters.
This is not conviction on his part. This is what his focus groups and his pollsters are telling him he should be saying, isn't it? I mean, these politicians don't make up policy on the hoof. They test every little word and attitude
from your advisors and from your focus groups. You get very mixed messages, and it's up to you as a presidential candidate ultimately to decide what kind of campaign you want to fight. And I suspect half of Al Gore's advisors probably think that he's not fought the ideal campaign from his point of view.
Colin, do you agree with that?
I think that Al Gore knows that Clinton fatigue is real in the land, so I think that's one of the reasons that he hasn't embraced Bill Clinton throughout this campaign. He went to great pains at the convention to tell us that he was his own man, and so I think he's been worried about the Clinton drag on his campaign throughout.
Right. Well, as we say, it's going to be very, very close, and we've got 5 minutes to go until we get another batch of states coming in, including 2 that we'll hear from. But at this stage, let's go to New York, and we join Michael Crick, who is out and about in New York and has been talking to voters in that state. Let's hear from him. Michael.
Welcome to Sylvia's restaurant here in Harlem, the heart of Harlem. Only 3 days ago, on Saturday, the restaurant here actually prepared food for Bill Clinton and his team at a rally they gave here across the road. But throughout the campaign, we've seen very little of Bill Clinton. People are saying that Al Gore should have made more of him, that Al Gore persistently said he wanted to be his own man. Anyway, let's see what effect that rally had on the local population. Tell me, sir, have you voted today?
Yes, I have.
Who for?
Gore and Clinton, Miss Hillary Clinton.
And is Al Gore as popular among black voters around here as Bill Clinton was?
I would think so. Yeah.
You think as many of them will come out?
Yeah, they'll come out. You'll show a little later on, before the poll closes tonight.
Do you think that perhaps Al Gore should have made more of Bill Clinton? He should have taken him out on the campaign a bit more?
I would think so, yeah. I think he should have been out there on the road a little bit more and campaigned a little bit harder than what he was doing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's have a word with this lady here. Excuse me, madam. How did you vote today?
Ralph Nader.
Ralph Nader?
Yes.
Was that an easy choice?
No, because they said vote for Nader. It was a vote for Bush, but I voted with my conscience.
Would you have voted for Nader in other places? Because of course in New York it may not make a great deal of difference, and that Gore will probably win here.
If it was a close race, if I was in a state with a close race, I would have voted for Gore. But since I think Gore had New York wrapped up, I voted for Nader.
Do you think a lot of black people will have voted for Nader?
No, no.
What about this problem there is of a lot of black people just not voting at all?
Apathy, voter apathy, and feeling they don't really have a choice. I think we need more than a two-system party in this country, and they need to speak more to the needs of African Americans, because the Democrats take our vote for granted. That's why I didn't vote Democrat this year.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed. And now back to you, David, in the studio.
Thanks very much, Michael. Well, let's go back just for a moment to Senator Mitchell, who's staying with us in New York. Senator, I don't know whether you were able to hear what was being said here about by Tony King here about the way that Al Gore ran the campaign and seeming to go off, not stress the economy and go off into slightly old-fashioned blue-collar issues. Do you think that was is so, or do you believe that their campaign right through was carefully calculated, using focus groups and all the rest of it?
Well, of course, both campaigns do regular polling and use focus groups. I think Gore's attempt was to extract the benefit from the 8 Clinton-Gore years without the liabilities of the 8 Clinton-Gore years. And that's a fine balancing act. Now, the comments made earlier suggest that he didn't do it fully successfully, and we won't know until the results are in. But clearly, like every politician, indeed like every human being in life, we try to maximize our advantages and minimize our disadvantages. That's what he tried to do.
Okay, Doug Sosnick, do you think they did the right thing in the way that they campaigned? Or do you take issue with what Tony King was saying?
Well, I think Senator Mitchell's right. I guess tomorrow the winners will be geniuses and the losers will be idiots. And that's how we keep score in American politics. But I do think that it's a difficult balancing act for anybody who's vice president. And you've seen it all throughout our history in this country, to get out of the shadows of the president and get elected. George Bush did it 12 years ago, and it's happened once before, but it's not something that happens often because of the difficulty of stepping out of the shadows of the president and being your own man.
Do you have any feel at this stage of the evening how this is going to go?
I think it's going to go into the morning. I think it's going to be a very close election. This is one time where the hype of how close the election was supposed to be is actually going to turn out to be true. And as you said earlier, I think the hype about the significance of this election is in fact real, and the stakes not only of the Congress and the presidency are on the line tonight, but also at least 2 Supreme Court nominations in the next 4 years.
Good. Okay, well, we're coming up towards 7 o'clock, and I said we'd have a couple of important results in at 7, but let's just have a look at what we get in the hour between 7 and 8 by way of the states. This is what we're in store for. Vermont and New Hampshire, the small northeast states. The big state of Ohio, 21 electoral votes there where Bush is leading. Virginia, 13 at stake there. And neck West Virginia. And then Florida, the all-important one, which George Bush badly needs. His brother is the governor there. 25 votes in Florida, very close. And 3 Bush states, North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina, all of which are likely to go for George Bush. So that's what's coming through in the next hour. But now, as we wait for the first indications from those places, let's go over to Los Angeles and we join Sean Williams.
Well, here at Venice Beach, we've been talking to some of the voters. They have already been out and voted, and whoever they voted for, they're confident that their man is going to win. But of course, this being California, a lot of TV networks here, and of course, Hollywood, all the campaign focused on the television programs, not just the debates, but also the television talk shows and the chat shows. With me, a couple of people to talk about that. Jonathan Taylor from Variety, hi, thanks for coming in, and Alison Byrne-Fields from Rock the Vote. Jonathan, starting with you, the whole television thing has been crucial to the candidates, hasn't it? How they perform.
Well, yeah, I mean, national politics in America, probably other countries too, but certainly in America, is absolutely a television event. If you want to get that big national, that big group of people, you have to be on TV. You have to show a certain amount of star power. You have to have a bit of charisma. You have to shine.
So in other words, you've got to be a comedian as well as a politician. Very difficult, isn't it?
Well, yeah, these two have shown they can't really be comedians. They're not particularly good at that, yeah. But you do have to have a certain amount of charisma, although neither one of them is overflowing with it.
Yeah. Alison, what do you think? Because, of course, the young vote is crucial, and that's who you're targeting to get out there and vote. And traditionally, they're apathetic. Have the candidates appearing on the sort of chat shows with Oprah and Jay Leno and Letterman actually made a difference, do you think?
Well, I think that young people aren't tuning into the nightly news, and so showing up on the late-night talk shows are definitely a way to reach the youth audience. But I think that it is really important for the candidates to be talking about the issues and to be talking about the issues that are relevant to young people, and they're not doing that. And so I think they're really losing a major opportunity to reach out to the youth vote.
Why aren't they talking about the issues?
I think a lot of it has to come down. It comes down to the fact that as far as being able to rely on people to turn out at the polls on election day, young people are not those people. It's the 65 and older vote that they know will show up. They're a small percentage of the U.S. population, but they turn out at higher numbers than any other portion of the population. So that's why we hear about Medicare and prescription drug plans and Social Security. So.
Well, Jonathan, I mean, did we get any sense of the issues in the presidential debates, or were they all very sort of stage-managed little sound bites?
Well, yes to both. They did, in fact, talk about some of the issues, but it was so stage-managed and so rehearsed and so careful, you couldn't quite tell what they were talking about exactly.
They rehearsed months beforehand, didn't they?
Yeah, it's very controlled. It's so unlike what they do in other countries. Prime Minister's questions, where they're firing questions back and forth at each other, and the Prime Minister answers them. I mean, that's something you would never, ever, ever, ever see in America.
That's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood, exactly. How ironic. But here, it's very controlled and very prescribed and very negotiated. It's a different kind of showbiz, I guess.
Yeah. Alison, do you think that puts a lot of people off then?
No, definitely. I was actually in the audience for the second presidential debate, and before it starts, Jim Lehrer says to everybody, you cannot speak, you cannot make a sound, you cannot emote.
It's so bizarre.
We couldn't indicate how we felt about anything, so we were all kind of like silently clapping, or but no, there's definitely it's a concern, because young people want to see candidates get excited about something. They want to see them be able to stand up strongly for something and not have this kind of controlled presence that they seem to have, and the debates definitely put across the sense of a controlled presence.
So, Jonathan, we are quite close to Hollywood. There's been a lot of talk about celebrity endorsements here and who Sharon Stone's coming out for, and Robert Redford, and we got Susan Sarandon, Tim Robbins going for Nader, we've got John Bon Jovi doing the Rock the Vote thing. Yeah. I mean, how important is it to get an endorsement? Does that like you to get people out and voting?
Well, it doesn't hurt. I think it's one more thing that might galvanize some attention and some support. It's so hard to get that big mass of voters, and especially in a year like this where the vote is so close, you'll take anything. And if there's a rock star, if there's a movie star who's going to endorse you, sure, you'll take that.
And the money, presumably.
And the money, well, definitely the money. They love the money. They love the money. Yeah. I don't really think that a particular celebrity endorsement is going to tilt this election either way, but it's one more element that doesn't hurt.
Alison, you do think to yourself, why are people being so apathetic? Why is the young being so apathetic? This is such a tight race, isn't it?
Well, I actually think that in terms of young people, I don't think they're apathetic. I think what happens is that because their issues aren't being talked about, they don't see the relevance of the election. And so, they're concerned about paying their bills, they're concerned about paying for college, they're concerned about the, guns, violence in schools, but whether or not those things are being discussed and their role in solving those problems is being discussed is the question. And if it's not, then they don't really see themselves as being a player in the game. They're excluded from it. So, I mean, they need to take responsibility, but candidates also need to take responsibility and reach out to these people.
All right, Alison, some of the issues you've been talking about, guns and abortion, we'll be going into a little bit later, so stay with us. And don't forget, of course, you can contact us as well, because you can email us, and our email address is vote2000@bbc.co.uk. So send those in, we'll read a few out. David.
Thanks very much, Sean. Well, we've had some states already called, those first ones I talked about after 7 o'clock. Rather interestingly, Virginia and New Hampshire and Georgia all too close. Bush might have expected to take those. Gore's got Vermont and Florida, of course, too close. But let Peter just explain how things have panned out. Peter.
The map is unraveling, and indeed it is a very exciting race already. You can see just how difficult it's going to be to get a result early tonight. Here they are. There's 6 new states there, from right up here, New Hampshire, right the way down to Florida. Vermont clearly called there on the basis of the exit poll for Gore. Only 3 electoral votes in that. And South Carolina here, 8 electoral votes clearly called for Bush. But look, Florida, 25 votes at stake there. 13 in Georgia, 13 in Virginia, and New Hampshire's 4. All too close to call. Now, all too close to call means is that nobody is more than 10% ahead as a result of an exit poll. So it could still be quite a convincing win for example, George Bush, likely to win Georgia. However, there we are. Very, very exciting. Florida, 25 electoral votes at stake. It really could go either way. There's no convincing message from all this so far of who's going to win. Here are the electoral votes then clocking up on the left-hand side. 28 for George Bush so far, 3 for Gore. Of course, the 2 close to calls we haven't counted in that score there. And here's the story of Florida, which we're now expecting to come as well. It could take a long time before the precinct votes come out clearly. It went with Johnson in the big landslide of 64. It went with Reagan and Bush in 1988 and with Bush in 92 when Clinton won. So this is, broadly speaking, a state that you expect to be Republican. Clinton pinched it in 1996, and now it is too close to call. It really could go either way. They've been fighting very hard for Florida. And now we'll have a look at the national share of the vote there. The vote chalking up there, 500,000 so far for George Bush all over the country, 380,000, rather fewer for Gore so far, 56% to 42%. The others on 2%, Nader on about 1.5%, Ralph Nader, we talked about him. He's scoring about 1.5%, not obviously taking too much away from Gore at the moment, if that's really as small as his score is. These change figures here, don't take them too seriously at the moment. All they do is they assume that if that were the final scores, the Republicans will indeed be up 16% on where they were with Bob Dole, and the Democrats down 7%. When we get to a much more settled share, we'll be able to compare the shares clearly with last time. So, the race for the White House, 270 electoral votes then. Here's the race course. Let's see who's in the lead. We know very well who's in the lead, but of course, a lot of these states still to come clean, like Florida, like Georgia. 242 short. George Bush, not at all clear he's going to win, though. It could be anybody's win here. David, back to you.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, we go straight over to the Bush camp, as we're calling it tonight, in Austin. We join Ben Ginsberg, Ben Ginsberg, who's chief counsel to the Bush campaign. Mr. Ginsberg, are you surprised that Virginia, New Hampshire, and Georgia should all be too close to call at this stage?
Oh, I think that's sort of a natural phenomenon of the exit polling we have these days.
You mean that they think...
I think we're doing fine.
You think it's wrong, simply?
Oh, I think so, yes. And at the end of the day, those states will be firmly in the Bush column.
So you're confident on the basis of what you're hearing that you're going to win tonight still?
Yeah, our reports from the states and our state organizations are all very positive. Our folks are upbeat. The governor's positive message has resonated well throughout the country, and we're looking for a great night here in Austin.
Do you think that there was a little over-enthusiasm or complacency in the last stages of the campaign from the Bush camp compared with Al Gore, who went on campaigning right to the bitter end?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, Governor Bush certainly got to all the states that he wanted to get to, and frenetic energy is not necessarily the winning ingredient in a presidential campaign.
There was a lot of comment about his winging off to California for a couple of days last week, and people said, surely Bush doesn't expect to take California. Why is he wasting his time there? Do you think you're going to take California?
Oh, I think we have a very good chance at California. I think California was an important state to go to for purposes of sending a message about a new Republican Party. The governor was also able to visit Oregon and Washington in that swing. And they're certainly battleground states that the Democrats have won for the last 2 and 3 presidential elections, and in which the governor is very competitive, and which we expect to do quite well in.
How about Florida? How important is Florida to you tonight?
Oh, Florida is terribly important. I mean, there are any number of scenarios about how to get to the magic 270 electoral votes. Florida is, I think, one of the bellwether states we're all watching. But I think the governor will be elected whether we take Florida or not.
I don't want to be seen to be skeptical, but of course you are speaking while half America is still going out to vote. So I suppose you have to say confident and upbeat things at this stage, whatever the private information you have.
We just happen to be naturally upbeat because of the governor's message and the success of the campaign that he's waged.
Okay,
but I appreciate your questions.
Ben Ginsberg, maybe we could talk a bit later on when a few more polls have closed and we see how things are in a bit more detail, because people watching all around the world will be fascinated to hear what you say. Thanks very much
Thank you.
indeed.
It's a great night.
Thanks for joining us. And we go now to Nashville, and we join Lanny Davis, who's a member of the Gore campaign team and had particular responsibility for Florida. Lanny Davis, do you agree that these exit polls, such as we've had, really are too soon and not convincing, and that there's no reason for the Bush camp to feel discomforted?
Well, we're all listening to the same exit polls, and there's still a lot of more voters who haven't even started to vote yet. But based upon what I have heard, my friend and law partner, Ben Ginsberg, is overly optimistic, certainly about Florida and possibly about the rest of the country. But I do want to raise the question whether Governor Bush turning up in Tennessee and smugly, I think, making comments that offended a lot of voters in Tennessee on the eve of the election was a smart thing for Governor Bush to do.
What do you think about the Virginia, New Hampshire, Georgia all being too close to call at the moment?
Well, if Georgia and Virginia are too close to call, and we in the Gore camp counted those two states as pretty solidly for Governor Bush, then that suggests good news for Vice President Bush. But really, we all knew this was going to get down to the last voters, and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida, for your viewers back in England, is where this election will be decided.
Why have people had so much difficulty in choosing between these two candidates?
Well, quite frankly, they're two very good people. They have addressed the issues from a very narrow spectrum, with Governor Bush trying to be a moderate Republican and Vice President Bush always having been a moderate Democrat. So I think they have shared certain common issues, and where there have been differences, significant differences, are between the record of the last 8 years and what Governor Bush wants to do on Social Security and on a lot of issues that might threaten the prosperity that the Clinton and Gore administration is responsible for.
Now, Lanny Davis, thanks so much. I hope you'll join us again later on in the evening when the picture is a bit clearer and when maybe, as I was saying before, you can speak a bit more frankly, because all the polls will have closed. But I'm grateful to you for coming on now. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And here, just arrived in our studio, is the presidential candidate from the last election, Senator Bob Dole, who went down to a defeat at the hands of President Clinton last time, a distinguished majority leader in the Senate and a distinguished politician all round in this country. Just give us an idea, what was it like as you waited this time 4 years ago for the results to come in?
Well, I think in '96 we didn't have to wait long. I mean, we knew we were behind, and we almost knew instantly that as soon as we saw Florida, we knew it was over for us. And I think it had been over for a few days, but we had closed the gap some in the last few days. But this is a different election. I mean, this is going to be probably a very close election. I tend to agree that I can't believe Virginia and Georgia are too close to call. If that's a fact, or if that's just a mistake in the exit polls, that's not good news for George Bush. And of course, Florida is a big one for both Gore and Bush. So I think we just wait and see. It's not easy for those of us who are partisans on either side right now.
New Hampshire's just been called for Bush, incidentally, we've just heard.
Well, that's interesting, because that's one that we have a paper up there called the Manchester Union Leader that's pretty much
everybody all around the world knows that
newspaper. But they haven't helped the Republican Party over the years, and they've driven a lot of moderate Republicans out of the party. So if Bush wins New Hampshire, that's only 4, but that might, if he adds up enough 4s, take care of Florida if he loses. He can still win without Florida, but it's not easy.
Just give me an idea. You campaigned, I mean, you say you knew at the end that you'd lost, but you campaigned hard through the season up till the elections 4 years ago. What is the kind of pressure on these candidates as they go through day after day and speech after speech, the same old thing?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think it's sort of a test of your stamina and everything else. We had a sort of a 96-hour marathon at the end. We knew we were way behind. We were trying to save some House and Senate seats. So we stayed up for 96 hours, and it was a great experience by a lot of nice people. Some of them weren't even for us, but they thought if we could get up at 4 in the morning, they would too. But we had a very tough primary. I think that's the thing that I wouldn't say I would have defeated President Clinton, but Steve Forbes spent about $44 million roughing me up in the primary. President Clinton didn't have a primary, so he was in pretty good position. And I was sort of limping around after we won the nomination. But that's, you know, we had a great time. It's a great experience. It's probably the highest political honor you can have to be nominated by your party. And I think losers can still be winners. And I've been working every day since the election, trying to do some good things.
Do you think George Bush campaigned hard enough and right?
Oh, I think so.
I mean, he was a bit
all...
laid back at the end.
Well, I don't think he laid back. I mean, Al Gore went out for 30 hours, and you know, if he were should have stayed up for 96. I don't know why he cut out 66 hours, but you know, he did it. He worked hard. I think they both worked hard. My view is that you know, whoever loses is going to be scapegoating time. I remember when I was on the ticket with Gerald Ford in '76 and we lost. It was Senator Humphrey, my good friend, a Democrat, who came to me and said, "Let's go down and have a cup of coffee." And he explained all this to me. He said, "You know, it's a lot easier winning, and when you lose, they're going to be saying it's your fault, it's President Ford's fault, it's somebody's fault." And I think I learned a lot from the late Senator Humphrey, who was my good friend and a good Democrat and a good friend.
Okay. Doug Sosnick, what about you? You want to come in on this?
I would just say two things. I mean, one, I was involved with the campaign in '96 as well, and I think Senator Dole, the way he closed the campaign by campaigning around the clock, it really not only impressed the American people, but it also cut into our lead and not only put us under 50%, but also cost us probably some seats in Congress. And I would say, though, on the returns in New Hampshire, while it's only 4 electoral votes in a close election, it is important. And remember in the primary, not only did George Bush have a tough time there, but it was really a center of gravity for the McCain movement. So I think that in a very, very close election, that is the first thing that's happened tonight that I think you could say is bordering on significant.
Because all kinds of places have found presidential candidates campaigning in them, which normally would be ignored totally. I mean, 3 votes here, 4 votes there. Trying to patch together a majority.
Well, you know, you start adding them up. You know, you see all the maps, they all look blue. People think Bush must have won. Look at all that area covered. Well, of course, it takes, I don't know how many states Doug would know in the Midwest to take 54 votes in California. So you have to have North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and a few others. And then you get to 54.
And I just would say in the case of Florida, if George Bush wins Florida, he's in pretty good shape tonight. If, however, Al Gore wins Florida, then George Bush is going to have to win every one of these marginal small states in order to cobble together his 270 electoral votes.
Because some say that Al Gore concentrated his fire better by going to these big states. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, they had internal polling, and they had their own strategy, and they've got a lot of good people that have been in this business for a long time, and both sides had. And you know, it's easy when you win to say, well, we had a great plan, and when you lose, a few votes could make a difference. In '76, for example, 11,000 votes would have elected Gerald Ford president, me vice president, 8,000 in Illinois, 3,000 in Hawaii. But we didn't have those 11,000. That was another close election.
Yeah, you'd have to identify those 11,000 people by name.
Right, and they're hard to find. So, you know, I think we've got a great contest going here. I thought the pollsters might be wrong. I mean, I've been all over the country the last 3 weeks, and I sort of sensed that maybe Bush might have this, but you know, I think right now we'll just wait and see what happens.
So you're not confident that Bush has got it?
Well, I'm always confident, but I'm not overconfident. And I think as Doug said, when you get these little, Florida's going to be a big, and that'll probably be called before long. Yeah. But if Virginia and Georgia should go to Gore, or if it stays too close to call much longer, I won't be very confident.
One other thing, when you were campaigning, there's been a lot of criticism of this campaign, that particularly of Gore, that in a sense he's not been able to be his own man because he's been so driven by focus groups and opinion polls and all that. Were you campaigning all the time with people saying to you, don't say that, don't say this, Bob, put this line, do that? It didn't come across like that, but I mean, that was what was going on behind.
I mean, if I'd have had more fun in my campaign, I'd have gotten more votes, because people only saw the side they want to see. And after the election, I did the Letterman show, and I had hundreds of letters saying if I'd have seen that before, I'd have voted for you. So you never know what people are looking for. But one thing about when this campaign's over, to my relief, they'll stop talking about the last campaign. So.
Okay. Well, let's join Peter Snow now and see how things are stacking up, because we've had a few more, or slightly better defined results from some of these states, Peter, haven't we?
Well, it's just a fascinating situation, David. We have these extraordinary states here too close to call. Florida we might have expected because that was always going to be a close-fought battle. But as Bob Dole was saying, we got Georgia and Virginia here, states that should have gone slap down for George Bush, still too close to call, and here we are, about half an hour after the exit polls closed. Virginia apparently leaning to Bush, I'm told, but he should take that, he should take that one. New Hampshire he could even take. It's one of the few New England states that could just go Republican. Electoral vote then, so far there it is, clocking up to 28-3 to Gore. He has Vermont, only 3 votes there. Now here's something Bob Dole won't like looking at. This is what cost him the election in 1996. Those are the states that went with Clinton. Those key Midwest states went with Clinton, and Florida did in 1996. Those are the states where the battleground is. Wait for Pennsylvania's 25 electoral votes to come in. Ohio's 21, Michigan's 18. Here's Wisconsin with 11, Missouri with 11, and Kentucky there, of course, that did go Republican, but there it is, that was a key battleground state there, and of course, Florida there. So that's the way it's looking. That's the battleground that we're really waiting for the results in. Here's the share in Indiana. We've had now quite a lot of the precincts counted in Indiana. We've got 55% Republican, 41% Democrat, a very hefty lead there in what is a safe Republican state, only a tiny percentage there for the others, 1%. And here's Kentucky, the other one that we had the exit poll pretty certain of the Republican win there, 55-43, a 12% lead then in a much more marginal state, Kentucky, nevertheless a very substantial Republican lead, not too bad for George Bush, and only 3% the others. Ralph Nader really not showing his head much above the waterline here, David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, now I'm joined by Scott Reed on my left here, Dole's campaign manager.
Looking at the next president.
If the goal is to unite our country, to make a fresh start in Washington, to change the tone of our politics, can anyone with conviction say that the man for that job is Al Gore?
I stand here tonight as my own man, and I want you to know me for who I truly am. A president has to fight for all of the people, especially the families that most need help.
Why should I vote for you?
I'm for people, not the powerful.
Because of the surplus, I think you ought to be able to put more money in your pocket.
There is a record here, and Texas ranks 49th out of the 50 states in health care, in children with health care.
If he's trying to allege that I'm a hard-hearted person and I don't care about children, he's absolutely wrong.
If you want somebody who will fight for you and who will fight to have middle-class tax cuts, then I am your man. I want to be.
For those of you for me, thanks for your help. For those of you for my opponent, please only vote once.
I'm telling you, this election is hot. This race is close.
If Gore cannot beat the bumbling Texas governor with that horrific record, what good is he?
I quit drinking. I'm not going to drink, and I haven't had a drink in 14 years.
Tony King, you want to say something about the campaign?
I was very struck by the fact that in the course of that very short little filmlet we saw, Al Gore used the term fight 3 times. And I think one of the problems for the Gore campaign is that Gore has gone in for a combative, almost pugilistic style. This is a country that's pretty much at ease with itself at the moment. And I think one of the reasons that Bush has done much better than people thought he was going to do at the beginning of the campaign, that he's tapped into that feeling of national contentment. And Gore somehow has been swimming against that particular...
Time for change and all that stuff.
Yes.
But he did talk about a time for change. Sylvia?
The word fight is more symbolic of his feeling about the difference in the issues, and that there is a very big difference, and he's trying to create that contrast, which there is a very real contrast on so many issues. And I think that's a lot of why the Vice President has used that terminology to talk about and distinguish the substantive difference, which I think you saw him do in the debates and in a number of other places.
But he does have a problem saying a time for change when he's been in the White House for 8 years, doesn't he?
Well, I think that the question of a time for change, I think that the Vice President has in the speech at the convention, what he did was clarify that he is his own man, he is distinct from the President, but that he is going to continue much of the success in terms of economic policies and other things that have brought the nation along. I think what he's focused on is sort of taking the success to the next stage. And we've been very lucky, our economy has been very good, but there are still many others who have not been brought on by that success. And I think that's what he's pointing to in terms of the change. Bring the rest of the country along and those that have not been brought along by the success.
Do you accept that?
I agree with your point. The clear difference between these two candidates is that Bush has projected an outward, optimistic, and upbeat message about the campaign and how he wants to lead when he comes to Washington with a bipartisan message to end all the bickering in Washington. And Gore has closed with fight, fight, fight. I'm going to fight for you. That's how he closed the whole weekend in these kind of raucous rallies all over the country. And Bush picked up, you look at the analysis, during all the debates, Bush picked up a lot of female undecided votes because of his bipartisanship and his willing to work together. And it changed his culture in Washington that's been very difficult. And I think that's why he's finishing on a high.
Okay, well, in a moment what we'll do is go to Los Angeles and hear from the voters whether they agree with what your interpretation is. But in the meantime, more news. Virginia has gone to Bush, and North Carolina, surprisingly, which is thought to be very safe for Bush, are now too close to call. But these too close to calls, not necessarily very significant. We had 1 or 2 earlier on which were too close to call and then fairly quickly fell to Bush. So let's join Peter Snow now and just see how things are stacking up at just after 7:30 here in Washington. Peter.
Okay, David, let's just tilt the eagle to one side and see what's going on here. Here we have the states coming in. There's Bush with 4 states, and there is Al Gore with just 1 state. Put them on the map and see what it looks like. And as you say, things are building up. We're getting 1 or 2 more actually called. Here we go. There's South Carolina definitely gone for Bush. There's Virginia for Bush, and of course Vermont for Gore. And Georgia, I understand, is pretty nearly definitely for Bush. Here we have the change from last time. Just 1 of the states called has changed from where it was in the 1996 presidential election. That went for Clinton. That's Kentucky. Here we have the electoral votes then piling up. 41 for Bush. He needs 270 to win. There's nowhere near clear who's going to win this race again. Only 3 for Gore up here. But look at all these counts still going on. Very, very close indeed here. Now let's just have a look at the state that has just come up, this crucial state here, come up too close to call. 21 electoral votes at stake here. The northern part industrial, the southern part rural, absolutely split Republican, Democrat, but normally tends to be a Republican state. It should go for George Bush this time. The fact that it's too close to call is at least a sign that Al Gore hasn't lost all yet. It's a story over the past 50 years or so. Johnson took it, the big landslide there of 1964, but then Republican Reagan, Republican Bush, then Clinton took it in 92. In 96 it went for Clinton, and here we have it then too close to call this time. But broadly speaking, tends to be a Republican state. But again, too close to call. One of the vital big seven, the seventh biggest state in the Union. This one in Florida, too close to call.
Pete's
They both matter
senator, and
enormously,
some
David.
say, if she's successful there, to run as the first woman, Democratic woman president for the United States. Who knows? But anyway, certainly a tough woman who's survived a lot during the Clinton presidency and then struck off on her own to become a senator in her own right, to have a political career in her own right. Michael Crick has been in New York talking to people about the Hillary campaign.
The Old Town Bar here in the Flatiron district of Manhattan is one of the most famous bars in New York City. Been here more than 100 years, and there's not many things in America you can say that about. Now, of course, in New York itself, the big race hasn't been between Gore and Bush. It's pretty much assumed that New York's sewn up for Gore. But the race for the Senate seat between Hillary Clinton, the First Lady, and her Republican opponent, Rick Blasio. Excuse me, sir, did you vote for Hillary Clinton today?
Yes, I did.
What do you think Hillary Clinton will bring for New York as a senator?
That's a good question. I'm hoping that, well, one of the reasons I voted for her against Blasio was playing a kind of divisory, she was playing dividing tactics. He was setting groups against each other, which is an old New York tactic, and I didn't quite care for that. I'm hoping Hillary will kind of balance out the next right-wing mayor we have, quite frankly.
But people say she's a carpetbagger, nothing to do with New York.
Well, everyone's a carpetbagger in New York. I mean, how many New Yorkers were born here? I mean, I wasn't born here. Almost all my friends are from Europe or other parts of America, and I mean, that's really not a criteria for the disqualifier.
Do you think she wants to run for president eventually?
Honestly, I would doubt it. She may prove me wrong, but I don't think she's looking at the White House.
Do you think she could be elected president?
No, I don't think she could be elected president.
Why not?
I mean, Americans are a pretty small-minded bunch, so I don't think they go for a woman president. I think there'll always be the stain of her husband hanging over her, and no pun intended. And
no, what about you? You voted for Gore.
I voted for Gore.
But not for Hillary Clinton. Why was that?
I don't like Hillary Clinton at all.
Why not?
Oh, come on.
I just think she's power hungry. I don't think she's in it for the right reasons, and I don't want to see her running New York.
But wouldn't she be a high-profile senator for the? I mean, she'll be effectively, you know, if Gore doesn't win, she'll be effectively the leading Democrat in the country.
Well, effectively, yes, but she's not in it for the right reasons.
What do you think she's in it for, then?
Power. I think I have to disagree with my friend. I think she's looking to run for president.
Well, next time?
I think she'll try. I don't know about next time, but I think she'll try.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks very much indeed. Let's turn over here, and this gentleman over here. Now, how did you vote today? Did you vote for Hillary Clinton?
No.
Why not?
Because I think she's out to serve herself only. 1, 2, 1, 2.
But I mean, wouldn't she be good news for New York? A high-profile name like that?
No, I think she's divisive. So, you know, you can be a high-profile name, but if nobody likes you, you can't get anything done in the Senate.
Okay, do you think she'll run for president next time?
Maybe.
Assuming she's elected, that is.
If she wins tonight, maybe.
Wouldn't a president or a presidential candidate from New York be a good thing?
Again, maybe. I would have to have somebody I liked to feel good about the president, but I don't think that Bill Clinton did that much for Arkansas, and he's from there, so you know, I'm not sure that it's that great for the state that somebody's from.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed. And that's it from the Old Town Bar.
Thanks very much, Michael. Well, as you'll have seen while that was going on, Florida has been called for Gore. So, Carlin Bowman, does this mean a victory for Gore, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure it means a victory yet, but it's an enormous disappointment, I'm sure, for the Bush camp at this point, because I think earlier this year they thought Florida was going to be in their camp.
Tony King?
Well, Florida's very serious. It has the fourth largest number of electoral votes. It's very hard to win the presidency unless you win Florida, unless you do what Bush clearly hopes to do, which is win a huge number of states with small numbers of electoral votes. Notice also that we're getting all these too close to calls. Carlin and I have been shaking our heads. Some of them we think are just the networks being terribly cautious. But the fact that the networks are calling states that we all thought Bush was going to take easily as too close to call suggests very forcefully that Gore is doing very considerably better than anybody thought he would do a week ago.
And do you see a strategy for Bush still winning tonight?
yes, you could put together a lot of states to make him win the requisite amount of votes, but it's harder without Florida. Much harder.
So it's getting difficult.
It's getting difficult.
Well,
yes.
we've been joined here by Celinda Lake, Democratic pollster who does a lot of the polling and focus groups for the Democrats, something we've been talking rather scathingly about. you won't be surprised in the past. I'm glad you've come to defend yourself. No, we've been talking earlier about the way that politicians have a tendency now not to speak their own mind, and Gore particularly not to speak his own mind, but to rely on the polling. It seems it works.
Well, I wouldn't accept any of your premises. For example, I wouldn't accept that Gore doesn't speak his own mind and only speaks to the polls. I think George Bush is the one who has been engaged in kleptomania of Democratic issues, and it's the Republicans who have been running on Democratic issues this cycle. But I think that one of the things that will happen tonight, I think Florida is a sign of Gore going to do very well among senior voters, and this is a real good sign for other states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, and it's a real good sign for the Democrats.
Florida and senior voters.
Right.
Older people, you
Older
think.
voters.
You let out a whoop when you heard he'd taken Florida.
Yes.
And Scott Reed, I didn't hear anything from your lips at the time. Do you think it's a very bad turning point, perhaps, in tonight's results?
Well, it is. It's not the end of the night, but it is a turning point. It's very difficult for a Republican to win without the 25 electoral votes. Bush can do that. The next state to watch is now Pennsylvania, the second most senior electorate. The polls close there at 8 o'clock, and I think it's going to be a real watch. That's a watch state. You know, this has been a state where both campaigns have spent millions of dollars.
We saw George Bush arriving just a little earlier in his headquarters at Austin, Texas, and he refused to talk to reporters. It appears just to gesture to reporters there. I don't know whether he'd heard about Florida at this stage. I suspect not. Yeah, Ronald Reagan pretending to be deaf, you mean, yes. So, it ain't looking too good for the Bush campaign at the moment, but it's not yet over, is what you're really saying.
I wouldn't go that far. Obviously, we wanted to win Florida. We spent millions of dollars down there, Republicans did, to win Florida. There's still a path to 270 electoral votes. It does not include the Sunshine State, but as Melinda said, it's a little tougher.
Okay.
Tighter.
Well, we're joined now by Joe Klein, the White House correspondent of The New Yorker, the author of the famous book, Primary Colors, an account of a presidential primary campaign, which he wrote anonymously, and he's in Times Square. Mr. Klein, thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Joe Klein, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Just tell us, what's your take of what's happened so far tonight?
Well, this is a very, very close election. As far as I can tell from the early exit polls, there's something like 24 states that are too close to call. And so it's going to be a late night, and all of us are going to sit around and pontificate idly until the results come in. But Florida,
even after Florida?
Florida is an important state. Florida means that this is not going to be a Bush blowout. That's all it means at this point. But it's very interesting that New York and California are, and Illinois also, very large states expected to go for Gore. And this evening, however, may be the revenge of all the little states against the Democrats.
To show how things are, these are the results so far. George Bush, 5 states, 54 votes, and Al Gore, 2 states and 28 electoral votes. Remember. We were talking about the Nader effect. We may see that in Maine. We've got Massachusetts, Connecticut, all-important Pennsylvania with 23 electoral votes where Gore was leading, very close, been right 9 out of 10 times. Maryland, District of Columbia, New Jersey, Delaware used to be a bellwether state. And then Missouri in the Midwest, too close to call as we went into Election Day. Illinois, which should go Democrat. Michigan, a toss-up state, very important for a victory. The turnout there of the unions. We've been talking about factories that had closed for the day. And then Texas, super safe, of course, for George Bush, its governor. Oklahoma likely to go for Bush. Arkansas, Clinton's home state, a close fight there. It could be the Republicans take it from the Democrats. Alabama and Mississippi likely to go for Bush. And then Tennessee, Al Gore's home state, where his father was a senator, and that is a toss-up. So that's what we've got coming in the next hour. That is, according to the polls before we went in, is going to be a toss-up. Michigan, I see, Al Gore has been called as the winner in Michigan. Tony King.
Well, that's absolutely sensational from Al.
Quickly now, here we
Getting
have
up as the results.
states. We have 10 for Gore and 8 for Bush. Gore has overtaken Bush in terms of states for a start. In order of importance, the key ones that have gone red. Florida, absolutely nose-to-nose battle between him and Bush. He's won it. Michigan, crucial state. We all thought it was going to be too close to call for a long time. It's gone for Gore. Bush could easily have taken that one. Illinois, a vital state, 22 electoral votes there, 18 there, and 25 in Florida. Those are the key ones. A few more going for Gore up here. Just look what's happening. Vermont, Massachusetts, that was a shoo-in for him, an easy one. Connecticut can go Republican. Down here a little bit further, New Jersey, a big state, 15 electoral votes. Delaware tends to be a bellwether state as Delaware. It's gone for Gore. It could show who the next president's going to be. Maryland, Washington, D.C., the easiest of all for the Democrats to win. There are the ones still counting there, the absolutely critical states now. Pennsylvania here, 23 vital electoral votes there. And over here, Missouri. They've kept the polls open late in Missouri. It'll depend on Missouri and Pennsylvania, assuming that is, of course, that Gore can take California way over there in the West. And now let's just have a look at the electoral vote. 119, Gore's in the lead to 107 for George Bush. It's still anybody's race, though. Here we have the Michigan story, just to remind you quickly of the probably the most important win, the most unexpected win for Gore so far. Reagan and Bush took it in 1984 and 88, so it can go Republican Michigan. Clinton took it in 92 and 96, and now it's gone for Gore in 2000. He'll be very comfortable about that win there. Here's the race for the White House then, 270, the goal there. Off they go, and this time it's Bush and Gore absolutely neck and neck as they go through the 90-100, but they're leaving Bush behind at 107. Gore's on 119. He's short by 151, but he hasn't won it yet. Neither of them has. David. Still, David. I mean, it's an amazing race, this. One or two consolations for George Bush as we push the map westward here. We see that Oklahoma and Kansas have gone rather predictably for George Bush. Here is Alabama here. It's coloured up now. It was too close to call. It's gone for George Bush. It should never really been too close to call. He should have walked that one. And here we still have this counting going on in Ohio, which many thought would go for Bush quite early in the count. It hasn't. Pennsylvania, true crucial states. Let's just have a look now at the Big Seven and remind you again about the 7 states with more than 20 electoral votes, the key states: California, New York, Texas, Florida here, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio. Anybody in the 20th century who has become president has won 4 of these 7 states. And look what's happening here. Here we go. That's what happened last time, and those are the ones that Bush had to capture this time. This is what's happening now. Here we have 2 of them going to Al Gore, Illinois and Florida, Bush taking Texas. So everything now really depends on Ohio and Pennsylvania. Michigan has gone to that vital state. You can see the red one sticking up behind there. Quite a big state. Michigan has gone to of course, Al Gore. So that's very bad news for George Bush, as we were all saying earlier. Now, the race for the White House. Is George Bush going to be able to get to at least halfway along the race here? Yeah, there he goes, through 100, both of them going through 100, 130. He's just ahead. He's short by 140, but Al Gore could still get there first. David, back to you.
Thanks, Peter. Well, we now hear a bit about how Hillary Clinton's getting on, and we join Gavin Hewitt, who's at Hillary Clinton's headquarters in New York. Gavin. Well, I think perhaps we aren't able quite to go to him yet. We'll go as soon as we can. Let's just...
That's right. I think you saw Al Gore attempt to relate more to men by talking about the administration taking, 8 million people off the welfare rolls. And you certainly saw Governor Bush craft a campaign that was very much designed to close the gender gap. And he's been pretty successful at it, actually, talking about being a compassionate conservative, stressing issues like education. I mean, it's not too long ago the Republican Party wanted to abolish the Department of Education. So this was a dramatic shift, and he has closed the gender gap to some extent.
Tom Ewing, do you think that Bush overdid it on the tax cuts? I mean, there's a history of politicians, and we've had the same in Britain, of promising tax cuts that are bigger than is credible to the public, so they get scared and think it's going to hurt the economy and all this to it.
Well, I really don't think the tax cuts played as well as probably the Bush camp and other Republican leaders have have thought over the years, and I say that candidly, while I have supported my party in those tax cuts, and the reason you do that, if you leave the money on the table, will grow the government. And so you give it back to the people who've overpaid. But I do think that Vice President Gore made a good point on the taxes and on the Social Security issue. I believe that history will show that we'll come closer to adopting Governor Bush's Social Security plan than Al Gore's. Al Gore really didn't have one, but I think he's done a good job of playing rich against poor, minority against majority, have-nots against those who have more. He's been a divisive candidate, and it appears in some states, such as Florida, to have worked.
Good. Peter, have we got any polling showing how voters responded to the various policies that Bush and Gore were putting forward?
Yes, we have, David. It's very interesting looking at latest polls, and we put a little sample together for you. Here we have Bush versus Gore. People were asked who's the strongest leader, and Bush, on the whole, did take the lead there by 20% back in April, but look how it closed. By October, George Bush's lead over Gore on leadership was only 2%. And interestingly, on experience, Al Gore's lead over George Bush was 5% way back in January, but now Al Gore seems to have chalked up a lead of 16%. Two things that rather suggest there's been a shift in the electorate, believing that Bush is the leader, fewer believing that Bush is the leader now than did back there, and more believing that Gore wins on experience than earlier on this year. Who would be best on foreign policy, Social Security, Medicare and environment? Those are the red ones that go for the Democrat Al Gore. He leads by 2% on foreign policy, Social Security, by 7% on Medicare, and not surprisingly by a huge 28% on one of his favorite policies, the environment. Whereas Bush looks like the man to be in the lead on keeping the military prepared, 26% ahead of Gore on that, when people are asked who is the person with the best policy on defense. Education, 3% ahead, and taxes, plus 3% George Bush. Only a marginal advantage for him on taxes. I mean, he's going to cut taxes by such a huge amount. Just to look now at a rather more amusing one for you. Better looking. Who's the better looking of the two? Well, Al Gore wins that by a huge chalk. 20%. They can't be all women. Plus 20%. Better sense of humor. Well, Bush gets that, but 9% ahead of Gore on that. But interestingly, 2% more people rather had dinner with Gore than with Bush. So Bush doesn't entirely win on the personability stakes, David.
Dinner. Peter, thanks so much. I heard the opposite. Everybody wanted to have dinner with Bush, but wouldn't employ him and wanted Gore as their employee. But anyway, there we are. We'll see how they... Tony King, do you attach importance to these this straw poll of American opinion?
Well, these last ones, not at all. But did you notice that list as a whole?
Well, you don't opine about who's the more handsome.
I don't think that matters a great deal. But what's very striking about that entire list is that, with the exception of two things that weren't mentioned, abortion and gun control, this has been a European election. The kinds of issues that this election has been fought on, education, taxes versus spending, the future of the social security system, the pension system, these are exactly the things that are the stuff of the electoral politics of the UK, of France, of Germany. I mean, we tend to talk a great deal, quite rightly in many cases, about American exceptionalism. But this hasn't been an exceptional election in that sense. Anybody coming from anywhere in Europe would recognize all this. Yes, this is what early 21st century electoral politics is all about.
And this is because we're broadly at peace in the Western world and broadly prosperous.
I think that has a great deal to do with it, and I think some of the cultural divisions that used to mark so many European countries, over religion, for example, that have largely disappeared in Europe, are not in fact playing quite as large a part in American politics as used to be supposed.
Carlin, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I think the very fortunate circumstances that we find ourselves in today have made some of the other issues that we talked about in the past, just have taken them off the charts. And so we're looking at issues that people are concerned about in England and France, all over the world.
Do you feel that electorates in the West have become very selfish in the way that they assess their politicians and the priorities? I mean, for instance, not much about the third world, not much about global poverty, not much about, if it's true, global warming, an awful lot of concentration on the domestic issues. It's the same thing in Europe.
Well, I think Americans are generally very reluctant about their internationalism. They're not very attentive to foreign affairs. They prefer to concentrate on things in their own communities, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, where they really think they can make a difference. And so I think the kinds of issues that you described really are on the back burner, just because people don't think they can make much of a dent in those issues on their own.
Even though this is the richest country and the most powerful country in the world, and the one perhaps better placed than any other country to have an influence on the poverty in the rest of the world and the problems of the rest of the world.
They clearly give their politicians a lot of latitude to be involved in those situations abroad, but I think they themselves don't think they can make that much of a difference, and so therefore they leave it to their representatives in Congress and in the administration.
So they let other people get on with it. Hope other people will get on with that? Let them get on with it?
Well, they believe it because we are a generous country, and I think that they believe we will get on with it.
But it's too specialized for them to take a direct interest in?
Well, a lot of the issues are very complicated, and I think people don't take a very great interest in things that they feel are beyond the kinds of things that they talk about in their daily lives. Yes.
Okay. Let's just see how things stand then at this stage in the evening. Let's have a look at the map of the United States. Bush blue. Some people put Bush red and the Democrats blue, so it can be very confusing if you're watching all the networks here. But anyway, Bush has 11 states and 130 electoral votes at this stage, and Al Gore 12 states, including the bigger ones, and 146 electoral votes. So on that note, let's go over to Los Angeles and join Sean Williams for some reaction to what we've been talking about some of these key issues and the way they've played during the campaign. Sean.
Well, yes, some of the key issues that haven't really been discussed by the presidential candidates but have been playing quite heavily on the ground here are gun control and abortion. With me, some people to talk over those issues. I have Eddie Tabash, who's a civil rights lawyer, Mary Lee Black, who wants tougher gun laws, and Fred Brown, who's an internet entrepreneur and a Republican as well, and also you have some guns as well, don't you, Fred? If I can start with you, Mary Lee. Sure. Why is it so important to have tougher gun laws when the majority of the American people seem to be quite happy with the fact that they've got guns and we don't need tighter laws?
Actually, the majority of Americans want better regulation of guns, and we have 10 kids dying each and every day in America from firearm wounds. So I think that is an issue that is important to the American people. I'm disappointed that our presidential candidates have not been discussing it, but I can assure you that across America, people, especially the people who have been involved in the Million Mom March, have been very active. We've become political, not partisan, but political. I'm a lifelong Republican. This is a public health and safety issue.
Did you vote then?
Yes, I did.
Bush?
Yes, I did. I voted for Gore.
Just purely because of the gun issue?
Yes. And that was a deciding factor. You know,
Why do you feel so personally
we
about
talk
it?
about education, but you know, you can't educate a dead child. And personally, I lost a 21-year-old son because 15-year-olds had such easy access to a gun known as a Saturday night special. So it's very, very important to me and to the American public.
Fred, why do you keep a gun?
Well, it's very tragic, I must say, about her son, and I feel bad for her. A gun is an inanimate object. It's like my car or any cutlery. It takes a person to do something with it. It's a tool. It's meant for hunting and defending yourself. I own a gun because I legally can own a gun. I can go out and purchase one because I've obeyed the laws of this country, which means I can purchase a gun at any time. And if our current administration and other people who want to continue the same genre of legislation without enforcement, if they would enforce the existing laws on the books, we would have less gun accidents.
So not more laws, just tougher enforcement of the laws that currently exist.
Exactly. And talking about the horrifying figure of 10 or 40 people a day, there's 4,000 young American children killed every day by abortion in this country, which is a crossover issue. Well, that's horrific. Both figures are very horrific.
Let's cross to Eddie now and talk about the abortion issue, another issue that the presidential candidates haven't seemed to have talked about.
Yes, they have. There is no issue upon which the two candidates differ more than abortion and the general issue of separation of church and state. This election will determine, by virtue of who appoints the next justices on the Supreme Court, whether we become a backward religious tyranny or whether the United States continues to be a modern secular state in the 21st century.
Why? Why
because
is that?
all of the freedoms of separation of church and state, sexual privacy, intimate freedoms, lifestyle choices, all of these liberties hinge upon the United States Supreme Court. Right now, the religious right against the modernists, if I may say so, have 3 votes. They need just 2 more. If George Bush wins and replaces Stevens and O'Connor with the types of judges he is talking about, then the religious right wing will have a 5-4 majority to destroy the separation of church and state, to ban abortion, and to interfere in individual lifestyle choices, and to repeal the modern secular state.
Fred, how do you feel about this?
My friend is very eloquent about his position, and one of the rewards offered to him as American citizen is the fact to voice that opinion because he is alive. And that is one issue, one basic human right that he's not willing to pass on to other American children. And when the Congress passes, Republican and Democrat passes a partial birth abortion ban, and our current president and possibly soon to be president cannot ban a partial birth abortion, which is a child that
Al Gore is against partial birth
and
abortion.
if that child was to fall out of the womb, pardon my French, he would be considered an American citizen, yet they can pull him to the breach of that, take his brain out, kill the child, and then consider it abortion.
All right, well, there we have to leave it. So, Fred, Mary Lee, and Eddie, thanks very much for joining me. Back to you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, very much. Well, it's an interesting insight into the way this election is going. We're coming up towards the hour. It's going to be 9 o'clock here in Washington. And between 9 and 10, we have another 13 states whose polls are going to close. And perhaps they will clarify things for us a bit and tell us how things are going. Let's just have a look at those 13 states. Well, they include a lot of smaller states that may come in quite fast. Louisiana, New Mexico, Arizona, I mean huge physically, but small in numbers of votes. Colorado, then there's Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, the 2 Dakotas, Minnesota and Wisconsin, where we may get the Ralph Nader effect coming through. And then we have Rhode Island and, crucially, New York, where Hillary Clinton is standing as senator. I don't know how quickly we'll get her results. Apparently she has already been, as the polls close, been declared the winner. So Hillary Clinton, the wife, the First Lady, the first time a First Lady has won elected office of this kind, Hillary Clinton is now Senator for New York, as well, of course, of being First Lady until January when President Clinton stands down. Let's go straight over to New York and Gavin Hewitt. Gavin.
Oh, well, you can probably hear behind me at the moment, the crowd is going absolutely wild because it's been declared that Hillary Clinton is the senator for New York. The band is playing, the crowd is cheering, and they know that she's won, and not just won by a small margin, but by a very significant margin. One person said to me it may be between 10 and 12%. So the crowd here are very, very excited. It's been a tough, at times a mean and nasty race, but in the end, the First Lady has become senator.
What's the view there about why she's won? Because I've got Rick Wilson with me here, who was running Mayor Giuliani's campaign until he withdrew from the race, and he's saying he'd have run a very different campaign, and well, we'll hear from him in a moment, but I think he thinks he would have beaten Hillary.
Well, I think, first of all, it has to be said, Hillary Clinton has put intense energy into this campaign. She visited all 62 counties, many places like Buffalo in upstate New York, Republican territory. She went back there 29 times. And she did have concrete programs about wanting to attract high-tech firms into upstate New York, which is relatively depressed. Her campaign's been more focused. What she's had to contend with is intense dislike on behalf of some of the electorate for the fact that they regard her as something of a feminist, and also they attach her to the scandals in the White House. As you can hear, I'm probably being drowned out by the crowd celebrating again the news of her victory.
No, we can hear you fine actually here. Don't worry, just keep talking.
Right. But I think one of the reasons that she has done well, of course, is they've got out the African-American vote. At the weekend, both she and Bill Clinton spent a great deal of time at the Bronx in Harlem. They knew that if they got a big turnout here in New York City, then they probably would win. All they had to do then was eke out another victory in the suburbs immediately around New York, and they weren't so concerned about upstate. But I think they will attribute the victory here not just to the African American vote, but also to the labor unions. And they really, really have worked hard. They decided they wanted Hillary Clinton, and I think it's the traditional Democratic supporters who seem to have delivered for her this victory.
It must be some consolation for the president that his wife wanted him by her side when Al Gore was so clearly keeping him at a distance.
Oh, absolutely. I know a few weeks ago, Bill Clinton was going around saying, I just hate the fact that I'm not involved, that I'm not campaigning. And he did feel frozen out, and his advisors were talking to Al Gore and saying, look, let me off the leash. Let me go and talk to the African-American voters in Michigan and Pennsylvania. But Al Gore repeatedly said, this is my election, I'm going to win it in my own way. And in the end, Bill Clinton went to California, certainly here in New York, and went to two or three other places, like his home state of Arkansas. But it's very, very frustrating for him. But as I said earlier, for him, the really important race tonight was to see Hillary Clinton as senator. And that's something of a vindication for him, because if she had lost, that would have been seen as a verdict on the Clinton years.
Okay, Gavin, thanks very much indeed. Well, with the big tranche of states that have just closed at 9 o'clock on here in Washington, we've had these called. New York called for Gore.
Well, it's really possible now to construct a road to victory for Gore, although there's rumors that Florida may be too close to call after all, because the votes there are suggesting that Bush is staging a little late move forward in the count. So it's still a very dicey one. But let's just look how it's going. Here we have the 270. There's the winning post for Gore or Bush. And there they go, chalking up the electoral votes. Each state, different number of electoral votes. The key states on the whole going for Bush, 197. So he's short by 73. And there's Bush behind him. Can we construct 73 votes then out of the states that are to come? Can we find 5 states, where we can construct 73 votes? Well, the answer is yes. There are 11 there in Washington, a likely win for Gore. 7 more making 18 in Oregon. 54 in California, making 72 altogether. Where are we going to find 3 more votes to bring him to the 74 he needs? The answer is down here in Hawaii. He's bound to win Hawaii. We've shoved Hawaii and Alaska down here. There we have a total of 76 votes then that would carry Gore just through the winning post. But, wow, if Florida's recounting, then we're, well, not recounting, but if Florida's still too close to call and hasn't actually been won by Gore, then we're in a different ballgame. Back to you, David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Colin, what is going on?
Well, I'm not sure, but I've been doing my math here, and I think that we could end up with a very close election in which I think perhaps, assuming Vice President Gore wins Florida, that this election could easily boil down to Washington State, Oregon, and Colorado. And I think both candidates could easily end up in the 260s, with 1 or 2 states making the difference. And
it's really exciting. So it could go to 269, 269.
It could
or does your math not allow that
it
quite?
It could be, I don't have my math in front of me. We have to talk to the professor over there. But I think it's really going to boil down, though, to a couple of states at the end, and I think it's going to be very, very close.
And you made the assumption that Gore takes Florida, but actually the popular vote, as it's been counted at the moment, is still giving Bush the edge in Florida.
Well, I think if Bush were to win Florida, and I have no reason right now to think he is, but who knows? That's why you have elections, I guess. You count the votes. But if Bush were to win Florida, I think that certainly changes everything. But if Gore were to win Florida, then I think you're still looking at an election that could easily be decided by 2 or 3 relatively small states.
Hello, welcome back to Washington, whether you're watching us on BBC One, News 24, BBC World, or indeed on the BBC's internet site, where we can be found and where you can take part in a debate about what's going on. And very fascinating and exciting it is tonight, because from the start it was called as a very close race. It did look as if Al Gore was pushing ahead and was going to become next president. Then things started to go wrong for Gore. Florida, which he'd been said to have won is having second thoughts and it's now said it's going for Bush. And at this moment, we've got 60% of the Florida vote in, and Al Gore has 47%, and George Bush...
500,000 Republican to Bush, 23.25 million the Democrats for Al Gore, 50 to 48%, a 2% lead for George Bush there. Let's just compare that to some of the records in the past and see what it looks like. There's Garfield, James Garfield, back in 1880 with a 0.02% lead. He won the election with a minute lead back there, some, I think, 2,000 votes or something in 1880. 1960, very, very tight election, which Kennedy just won. Both of them, incidentally, got the majority of the electoral votes. They actually won not only with the popular vote, but also with the electoral votes, unlike that poor old guy in 1888. And then here we have George Bush in the year 2000 with 1.8% of the lead at the moment, of course. I mean, it could narrow down even more as the night goes on. It's not over yet by any means. Just look at how close these key states, Florida, Colorado and Wisconsin, look how close they are. 6% lead for George Bush at the moment in Florida, with something like half the vote counted, building up all the time, looking more and more like Bush, but it could go the other way. It started off looking like Gore, now he's looking like Bush. It may go the other way. Colorado, it does look strongly like Bush with a 12% lead over Gore. But look at Wisconsin. There are 11 electoral votes in that crucial state, Wisconsin. Gore badly needs it, so does Bush. And look at the lead that Gore has in that state of Wisconsin, with quite a lot of votes still to be counted. So again, these are absolutely critical and moments in the count coming up now in the next hour or two. We're going to get California coming in too. California, Washington, and Oregon coming in about 20 minutes. 24 states then for Bush, 15 for Gore, and the electoral votes, here they are, 217 for Bush and 172 for Gore. That's it then, and there again is the national share. It is the 2% lead for Bush at the moment, David.
Peter, thank you very much. Well, we go down to Tennessee.
A First Lady who has now become an elected senator, and particularly a remarkable achievement because of all the years of scandal and disgrace. The crowd here is ecstatic because earlier in the evening they believed she had won by 7 or 8%. And behind her, Bill Clinton. And for him, this is repaying a debt. For over 30 years, she has really been his kind of campaign manager, looking after him politically. And now he can really savor her victory. Is this a great night or what?
Now, this is a great night, and I know that you will all want to join me. We have so many thanks to give tonight, but one is to a person. I know I wouldn't be standing here as your senator, and the First Lady wouldn't be standing here as your senator-elect. Without the leadership, the intelligence, the compassion, the dynamism of the man who put our country back on track, of the man who put our party back on track, of the man we owe so much to, our great President Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, remarkable to see the affection for President Bill Clinton, despite all the...
I mean, wow, this is amazing. Thank you all. Thank you. You know, we started this great effort on a sunny July morning in Pinder's Corner on Pat and Liz Moynihan's beautiful farm, and 62 counties, 16 months, 3 debates, 2 opponents, and 6 black pantsuits later, because of you, here we are. You came out and said that issues and ideals matter. Jobs matter, downstate and upstate. Health care matters, education matters, the environment matters, Social Security matters, a woman's right to choose matters. It all matters, and I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, New York.
States that still aren't called, including Florida. Peter, can you bring us up to date?
Yes, David, all the polls have now closed except in Alaska. And look how our map is coloring up now from east to west. And look also how many of those states are gray for too close to call. Places like Wisconsin, Iowa, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and Washington and Oregon up here, Washington at the top and Oregon down there. Nader scoring about 6% in each of those states. He could still stop Gore, but Gore apparently is leading even so. Up here in Wisconsin, Nader's got about 2 or 3% there, and of course Gore and Bush are absolutely neck and neck there, as we showed earlier. So it's a very, very tight race indeed, all over those states that are too close to call yet. Look at the share of the vote, 49 to 48%, was almost as close as Nixon and Kennedy back in 1960. The electoral votes, again, interestingly, almost neck and neck, unlike Kennedy and Nixon, where Kennedy was way ahead, 217 to 230. Let's just look at the race for the White House now. They need 270 electoral votes to cross that threshold and be sitting in the chair in the Oval Office. Here we have Gore on the left and Bush on the right. Let's set them on their tracks now towards the White House. Here they go through 100, through 150, 160, 170, 180, 190. Bush stopping at 217, Gore on 230. California did a lot for that, so Gore is short by 40. But just look at this. Here is the electoral vote now. Just take it back to the electoral vote. 230 Gore, 217 Bush. There's California going for Gore. But look now at what Bush can do. If he now wins Florida, Wisconsin, Iowa, Colorado, and Arizona, and I gather Bush has just made sure that he's won Colorado, Arizona, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Florida, Bush will be home. Sorry, he needs Alaska as well. You can produce scenarios where Gore can win, but Bush, on the whole, given Florida, of course, was the crucial one, the crucial county in Florida, Bush does look as if he just might squeeze in there, David, but it's terribly close.
Peter, thanks very much indeed. Well, we've got an argument going on here while you've been talking about scenarios for Bush to win and scenarios for Gore to win. And around this table, there are still people who believe both results, I mean, not both results, one or other result is possible. In a moment, nobody's certain how it's going to work out. With the results we've had in so far, Bush 25 states and 225 electoral college votes, and Gore 17 states, and that's 230. Now, let's just talk for a moment about how this could break either way. Josh, you think it could break either way?
I can see possibly how Gore gets to 272, 2 electoral votes more than is needed. Washington, 11 electoral votes, Oregon, 7, Wisconsin, 11, Iowa, 7, Arkansas, 6. That brings me up to 42 in addition to the 230 there. That's 272. It's a long shot, but if you need to put Florida aside, and I'm trying to find out what's actually going on in Florida from some other sources, but if you have to put Florida aside, that's a way to get to 272.
Well, the latest figures we have for Florida, 72% of the vote counted, Gore at 47%, Bush at 50%. But the counties not yet counted are still said to be leaning more Democrat than Republican, so it could even that balance.
George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States. It's been the tightest race for power in a generation. Well, good morning from Washington. It is 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 8th of November, and what an extraordinary night it's been here in the United States. In the last few minutes, all the American TV networks have been announcing that George W. Bush is going to be the next president, the 43rd president of the United States. They've already been celebrating in Texas. We've also heard that from the White House that shortly Vice President Al Gore will be making a statement. In New York, Hillary Clinton has become the First Lady to be elected to the Senate.
Hi, good morning from London. I'm Sophie Rayworth. The other headlines this morning: more money for pensioners and incentives to be a greener motorist, thought to top the Chancellor's list of spending plans announced today. And as more homes are evacuated, environment officials warn it could be next week before the floods ease off.
Well, they said it was going to be the closest presidential race since 1960, and it was. In the last half hour, George W. Bush appears to have won the race for the White House after clinching the key state of Florida. There was a cruel twist of irony for Vice President Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, because the TV networks had earlier predicted and then had to backtrack that he would take the state.
That's good, thanks. Still cautiously optimistic, but none of the cocksure self-assurance of the final days of campaigning. The Texan governor began the night at a restaurant in Austin with his parents. The news reports predicting that some key battleground states had fallen to his opponent. A far more jubilant scene then in Nashville, Tennessee, the home of Al Gore, his supporters cheering when they heard on TV that the Democrats had taken Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. It was proof, they thought, that the vice president was on his way to the White House. And he was soon on local television, no premature claims of victory, and still saying the race would be close.
I think it's right on schedule. I feel very good about it, very excited about it. But it really and truly may come down to Tennessee. And if somebody is at home listening to us right now and hasn't voted, I need your help. Go to the polls and vote, please.
Doesn't believe the But Tennessee was leaning to Bush, so too some of the other key states. And the news from Florida, so crucial to his electoral arithmetic, was getting much better.
The networks called this thing awfully early, but the people actually counting the votes are coming up with a little different perspective. And so I'm pretty darn upbeat about things.
This is an ABC News special, the 2000 vote.
The TV networks had indeed got things wrong. Florida wasn't in the Gore column after all. If anything, it was leaning to the Texan governor. They love that in Austin, Texas, believing that if Bush carries the Sunshine State, he'll carry this election. Back in Tennessee, things weren't looking so good. The news from Florida was bad. Not since 1960 had there been tension on election night like this. But shortly before 3 in the morning, what could prove the decisive moment? The television networks announcing that Bush had held on in Florida by the tightest of margins, that he'd won the presidency as a result. Scenes of unbridled joy then in Texas, but still no concession from Al Gore. It looks like a Bush restoration in the White House, but we still aren't exactly sure. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
We'll be going over live to the Gore headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee very shortly, but first of all to Austin, Texas. Tom Carver, our correspondent, is live there at the headquarters of George W. Bush. A great night for the Bush family, Tom.
An incredible night for the Bush family, yes. Not only have they made history, only the second time in the history of America that a father and son have been elected president. The last time was in the 1820s with the Adams, but it has been...
Those states back, but not enough to make it a really convincing victory, like Bill Clinton's was last time. In the electoral vote, 270 required for an overall majority. He's just through with one more than he needs, and there's poor old Al Gore down there on 249. And this was the decisive one in Florida down here that decided it. There we have the share of the vote, 49%, 48% for Al Gore, a 1% lead in the share of the vote, up 8% on what Senator Dole did 4 years ago for the Republicans, George Bush, down 1%, Al Gore, on what Bill Clinton achieved 4 years ago. And the votes, nearly 45 million there and 44.5 million here. Ralph Nader clearly helped take the victory away from Al Gore. He's one of those percentage points down there, 2% or so, Ralph Nader in some of the vital states taking votes away from Al Gore, certainly in Florida, for example. Look back at the records in history. The tightest of all was James Garfield back in 1880, a lead of only 0.02%. He just won the popular vote, convincingly won the electoral vote. He won in all the important states. So did Jack Kennedy win in all the important states with a 0.1% lead only in the popular vote. Here we have a 0.4% lead in the popular vote for George Bush, and also a very, very narrow lead.